They told me I broke the law, but how do you break a law by saving a life? I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was just trying to help. That night, I looked into her eyes and knew if I walked away, she would die. So I stayed. I did what I had to do. And for that, they put me on trial. Not for a crime, but for compassion. And sometimes compassion costs more than guilt ever could.
They told me I broke the law. But how do you break a law by saving a life? I wasn't trying to be a hero. I was just trying to help. That night, I looked into her eyes and knew if I walked away, she would die. So I stayed. I did what I had to do. And for that, they put me on trial. Not for a crime, but for compassion. And sometimes, compassion costs more than guilt ever could. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm a nurse. Or at least I was. I spent 15 years working in emergency rooms across Pennsylvania, from Philadelphia to small-town clinics where everyone knew your name. I'd seen everything. Gunshot wounds, overdoses, car accidents that left families shattered. I'd held the hands of dying patients and whispered comfort to people who had no one else. I thought I knew what it meant to save a life, but nothing prepared me for that October night in Harrisburg. It was 11:47 p.m. when I heard the knock. I was home, finally off a double shift, still in my scrubs, heating up leftover soup because I was too exhausted to cook. The knock came again, desperate, frantic, like someone was trying to break through the wood itself. When I opened the door, she collapsed into my arms. She was young, maybe 22, 23, with dark hair matted against her pale face. Her eyes were wide with terror, pupils dilated, and she was clutching her stomach. Blood seeped through her fingers, dark and steady. "Please," she whispered in accented English. "Please help me. They will kill me if they find me." I didn't think. I just acted. I pulled her inside, locked the door, and laid her on my couch. My hands moved automatically, checking her pulse, examining the wound. It was a stab wound, deep, near her abdomen. She was losing blood fast. "What's your name?" I asked, pressing towels against the wound. "Amara," she breathed. "My name is Amara." "Okay, Amara, I need to call 911. You need a hospital." "No." She grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "No police, no hospital. Please. They will send me back. And if they send me back, I am dead." Her eyes told me everything her words couldn't. She was undocumented. She was running from something, or someone, that was worse than bleeding out on a stranger's couch. I should have called anyway. That's what the law says. That's what my training says. Report. Document. Let the system handle it. But systems break people. I'd seen it happen too many times. "Okay," I said quietly. "No hospital. But you have to trust me." For the next 4 hours, I worked. I cleaned the wound, stitched her up with supplies from my personal medical kit, gave her antibiotics I'd kept from a prescription. I monitored her vitals, kept her hydrated, talked to her to keep her conscious. She told me fragments of her story between waves of pain. She'd come from Honduras, fleeing gang violence that had already killed her brother and father. She'd made it to the United States 3 years ago, worked under the table at a restaurant in downtown Harrisburg. 2 days ago, her ex-boyfriend, a citizen who'd promised to help her get papers, attacked her when she tried to leave him. He stabbed her and threatened to call immigration if she went to the police. She had nowhere to go, no one to trust, except me, a stranger who answered a door. By sunrise, her fever had broken. The bleeding had stopped. She was going to survive. I let her sleep on my couch while I sat in my kitchen, drinking cold coffee and staring at the sunrise through my window. I felt the weight of what I'd done settling over me like snow. I'd saved her life, and I'd broken the law. I just didn't know yet how much that decision would cost me. Amara stayed with me for 3 days. I called in sick to work, something I never did, and spent those days making sure she recovered. I changed her bandages, monitored for infection, made sure she ate and rested. We didn't talk much. She was afraid, and I was processing what I'd gotten myself into. On the 3rd morning, she was strong enough to stand, to move around without wincing. I'd made arrangements with a friend who ran a women's shelter, off the books, no questions asked. Amara would be safe there while we figured out next steps. I was packing her a bag when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw 2 police officers and a man in a suit. My stomach dropped. "Sarah Mitchell?" the man in the suit said when I opened the door. He held up a badge. "I'm Detective Marcus Hayes with Harrisburg PD. We need to ask you some questions." I let them in because refusing would have made it worse. Amara was upstairs, and I prayed she'd have the sense to stay hidden. Detective Hayes didn't waste time. Ms. Mitchell, we have reason to believe you provided medical care to an undocumented individual without reporting it to authorities. Is that true? My mouth went dry. I don't know what you're talking about. Your neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, reported unusual activity at your residence 3 nights ago. A young woman entering your home late at night, appearing injured. You haven't left your house since. Your car hasn't moved. Mrs. Patterson, the woman who always complained about my garbage bins being out too early, who'd called the city on me twice for letting my grass grow a week too long. Of course it was her. I had a friend visiting, I said. She felt sick, so she stayed over. Is that illegal? It is when you fail to report a medical emergency. It is when you harbor someone in the country illegally. It is when you obstruct an investigation. What investigation? Hayes pulled out a tablet, showed me a photo. It was Amara's ex-boyfriend, bruised and bandaged. Miguel Cordero filed a report claiming his girlfriend attacked him and fled. He said she was unstable, possibly armed, said she'd threatened his life. We've been looking for her. Everything clicked into place. The bastard had struck first, with the police, with his narrative. He'd made himself the victim. That's not what happened, I said. Then you do know where she is. I'd walked right into it. Ladi Dunn and the streets of this Pennsylvania city would soon become the backdrop of a legal battle that would change everything. Can you guess which city this story takes place in? Drop your answer in the comments below. They arrested Amara that afternoon. I heard her crying as they let her out in handcuffs, and I couldn't even look at her because I felt like I'd betrayed her just by letting the police through my door. They didn't arrest me that day, but Detective Hayes made it clear. I was under investigation. 2 weeks later, I was formally charged. The charges were surreal. Failure to report a medical emergency, harboring an undocumented immigrant, obstruction of justice. Each one carried potential jail time, fines, and the loss of my nursing license. My lawyer, a public defender named Janet Reeves, was blunt. Sarah, they're making an example of you. There's been political pressure to crack down on this stuff, especially in election years. If you plead guilty, I can probably get you probation, community service, maybe keep your license. And if I fight it, she looked at me like I was crazy. Then you risk everything. Your career, your freedom. For what? You broke the law. The law is clear. The law is also supposed to protect people, I said. I saved her life. The prosecutors will say you should have called 911, that's it. That's their case. And what's mine? Janet sighed. That sometimes doing the right thing means breaking the wrong rules. But Sarah, juries don't usually buy that. I went home that night and sat in the dark, thinking about Amara's eyes, about the blood on my hands, about the choice I'd made. I didn't regret it. Even if it destroyed me, I didn't regret it. 3 months that felt like 3 years. I was suspended from work pending the outcome. The hospital claimed it was protocol, but I knew the truth. They were covering themselves. They couldn't be associated with a nurse who'd violated federal immigration law, even if she'd saved a life doing it. My face was in the papers. Local nurse faces criminal charges for treating undocumented immigrant. The online comments were vicious. She broke the law. Period. If she cared so much, she should have called 911. She chose to play doctor. This is why we have laws. You don't get to pick and choose. But there were other voices too. She saved a woman's life. Since when is that a crime? The real criminal is the system that made her choose between saving someone and following the law. I hope I never need help in a world where people are afraid to give it. I didn't read the comments after the first few days. They made me feel too much. Angry, sad, afraid. Instead, I focused on building my case. Janet introduced me to an immigration attorney named David Ochoa. He'd been working with Amara, trying to keep her from being deported while her asylum case was reviewed. Miguel had recanted parts of his story when pressed by investigators, admitted she hadn't attacked him, admitted he'd been angry and maybe pushed her, but the damage was done. Amara was in detention, waiting for a hearing that might send her back to Honduras. If we can get her testimony, it'll help your case, David said, but it's risky for her. Drawing attention to herself could hurt her asylum claim. I won't ask her to do that, I said immediately. She's been through enough. Sarah, she wants to testify. She told me herself. She said you saved her life, and she's not going to let them punish you for it. I met Amara 2 weeks before the trial. She was thinner, her eyes haunted, but when she saw me, she started crying and grabbed my hands through the glass partition. I'm so sorry, she said. This is my fault. No, I said firmly. This is not your fault. None of this is your fault. You should have let me die. Don't you dare say that. Don't you dare. She looked at me with those same eyes I'd seen that night. Terrified, desperate, but also filled with something else now. Hope, determination. I will testify, she said. I will tell them what you did for me. Amara, no, you gave me my life back. Now I give you yours. And the prosecution's case was straightforward. They called Mrs. Patterson, who testified that she'd seen suspicious activity, and called the police because she was concerned about the neighborhood. They called Detective Hayes, who explained the investigation. They called a legal expert who outlined all the ways I'd broken the law. Then they called Miguel Cordero. He was cleaned up, wearing a suit, playing the part of the concerned citizen. He testified that Amara had been unstable, and that he'd been trying to help her when she attacked him. He said he'd filed the police report because he was worried about her. Janet tore him apart on cross-examination. Mr. Cordero, you stated Amara attacked you. Where were your defensive wounds? I don't know what. Defensive wounds. Cuts, bruises on your hands, arms, the kind you get when you're fighting off an attacker. Where were they? She had a knife, but she didn't cut you. She only stabbed you once, in the abdomen, correct? That's what you told police. Yes. And yet the medical report shows your injuries were consistent with offensive action, not defensive. You were the aggressor, weren't you? Objection. The prosecutor shot up. Speculation. Sustained, the judge said. But the damage was done. The jury had heard it. When Miguel left the stand, he wouldn't look at me, but I knew he was scared. Good. He should be. Janet called me to the stand on the second day of the trial. I'd been dreading this moment, having to explain my decision to a room full of strangers who'd already made up their minds about me. I wore a simple blue dress, no jewelry. Janet had coached me. Look sympathetic but professional, emotional but not hysterical. Ms. Mitchell, Janet began. Can you tell the court what you were doing the night of October 17th? I took a breath. I was home. I'd just finished a double shift at the hospital. I was exhausted. I was heating up soup when I heard someone knocking on my door. What did you do? I opened it, and a young woman collapsed into my arms. Can you describe her condition? She was bleeding heavily from a stab wound to her abdomen. She was pale, disoriented, in shock. Her pulse was weak. She was dying. What went through your mind in that moment? That I had to help her. That she would die if I didn't. Did you consider calling 911? This was the critical question. I met Janet's eyes, then looked at the jury. Yes, I told her I was going to call, but she begged me not to. She said if I called the police, if I called an ambulance, they would send her back to the people who were trying to kill her. She was terrified. And when I looked at her, I believed her. So you made a choice. I made a choice to save her life. Whatever else happened, I couldn't let her die on my doorstep. The prosecutor, a sharp-faced man named Robert Green, stood for cross-examination. He looked at me like I was something unpleasant he'd found on his shoe. Ms. Mitchell, you're a trained nurse, correct? Yes. And in your training, you learned about mandatory reporting laws, did you not? Yes. You learned that certain injuries, like stab wounds, must be reported to authorities. Yes. And yet you chose not to report this injury. Why? Because she would have died before... That's not what I asked. I asked why you didn't report it. Yes or no? I chose her life over the law. Green smiled like he'd won. You chose to break the law. I chose to save a human being. Ms. Mitchell, do you believe you're above the law? No. Do you believe laws don't apply to you? No. I believe laws should protect people, not condemn them. But you don't get to decide which laws to follow, do you? I looked right at him. I decided that night that I'd rather face consequences for saving a life than live with knowing I let someone die because I was afraid. The courtroom was silent. Green switched tactics. Ms. Mitchell, how do you know Ms. Amara Hernandez was telling you the truth? How do you know she wasn't the aggressor? Because I've been a nurse for 15 years. I've seen abuse victims. I've seen perpetrators. I know the difference. But you didn't verify her story. You didn't check with authorities. You just believed her. I trusted my instincts, and my instincts told me she was in danger. Your instincts, not facts, not evidence, just your feelings, my experience. I corrected. And yes, I trusted it. I still do. Green shook his head like I was a lost cause. No further questions. When I left the stand, my legs were shaking. I'd said what I needed to say, but I had no idea if it was enough. Janet leaned over. You did good. Now we bring in the real weapon. What weapon? She smiled. The truth. The next witness was Dr. Patricia Lee, an expert in domestic violence and immigration trauma. She explained, in clinical but compassionate terms, why victims like Amara often don't trust authorities, why they run, why they hide, why they'd rather risk death than deportation. In Ms. Hernandez's case, Dr. Lee testified, returning to Honduras could very well mean death. Gang violence there is systemic. Her family members have already been killed. She had every reason to fear deportation. The jury listened. Some took notes. I couldn't read their faces. The courtroom doors opened, and 2 federal officers escorted her in. She was wearing an orange detention uniform, her hands cuffed in front of her. She looked so small, so fragile, but when her eyes found mine across the room, she stood a little straighter. The judge ordered her cuffs removed. Amara rubbed her wrists and took the stand, raising her right hand to swear the oath. Her voice trembled, but it was clear. I do. Janet approached gently. Ms. Hernandez, can you tell the court how you met Sarah Mitchell? Amara nodded. It was October 17th, late at night. I was running. He stabbed me. I got away, but I was bleeding so much. I didn't know where to go. I couldn't go to a hospital. I have no papers, and Miguel said if I went to police, he would make sure I was deported. So I just ran. How did you end up at Ms. Mitchell's door? I saw her house. There was a light on. I don't know why, but I felt like maybe she would help. So I knocked, and she opened the door. What did she do when she saw you? She caught me. I was falling, and she caught me. She brought me inside, and she saved my life. Amara's voice broke. She didn't know me. She didn't have to help me, but she did. Did you ask her not to call 911? Yes. I was so scared. I told her if she called, they would send me back, and I would die. I begged her not to call. And what did she say? She said okay. She said she wouldn't call, but I had to trust her. So I did. Janet let the words hang in the air before continuing. Ms. Hernandez, what happened with Miguel Cordero? Amara's hands clenched. We met 2 years ago. He was nice at first. He said he loved me, said he would help me get papers so I could stay in the United States. But then he became controlling, jealous. He would hit me sometimes when he was angry. I tried to leave many times, but he always found me. He said I belonged to him. What happened the night you were stabbed? I told him I was leaving for good. I had saved money. I had a friend who would let me stay with her. He got so angry. He grabbed a knife from the kitchen and he stabbed me. He said if he couldn't have me, no one could. He said if I told anyone, he would call immigration and make sure I was deported and killed. So you ran? Yes. I ran until I found Ms. Mitchell. Robert Green stood for cross-examination. He was less aggressive with Amara than he'd been with me, probably aware of how it would look to the jury. Ms. Hernandez, you're currently in federal detention facing deportation, correct? Yes. And you're hoping that testifying here will help your case. I'm testifying because Ms. Mitchell saved my life and I won't let her be punished for it. But you admit you're in the country illegally? Yes. I came here because I would have been killed if I stayed in Honduras. My father and brother were murdered by gangs. They came for me next. So I left. But you didn't go through proper channels. You didn't apply for asylum at the border. I was 19. I was terrified. I didn't know there were channels. I just knew I had to survive. Green frowned. Ms. Hernandez, do you think Ms. Mitchell should have called 911 that night? Amara looked directly at him. If she had called 911, I would be dead, either from bleeding or from being sent back. So no, I think she did exactly what she should have done. She chose life over paperwork. But the law would have killed me. The courtroom erupted in whispers. The judge banged his gavel. Order! When the room quieted, Janet stood. No further questions, Your Honor. Amara stepped down. As she passed me, she reached out and squeezed my shoulder. Thank you, she whispered. I couldn't speak. I just nodded. Robert Green stood before the jury, hands clasped behind his back, voice measured and firm. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is not about whether Ms. Mitchell is a good person. I'm sure she is. It's not about whether she had good intentions. I'm sure she did. This case is about whether one person gets to decide which laws apply to them and which don't. He paced slowly, making eye contact with each juror. Ms. Mitchell is a trained medical professional. She knew the law. She knew that stab wounds must be reported. She knew that harboring an undocumented immigrant is a federal crime. She knew all of this, and she chose to break the law anyway. He paused for effect. She wants you to believe she had no choice, but she did. She could have called 911 and let trained paramedics handle the medical emergency. She could have let immigration authorities handle Ms. Hernandez's status. She could have followed the law, but she didn't. Green turned to look at me. Ms. Mitchell decided she knew better than our legal system. She decided that her judgment, her feelings, her instincts were more important than the laws we all agree to follow. And if we allow that, if we say it's okay to break the law when you feel it's the right thing to do, then we have no laws at all. We have chaos. He returned to the jury. I sympathize with Ms. Hernandez's situation. I do. But Ms. Mitchell's actions didn't help her. They put both of them in danger. Proper medical care, proper legal channels, these exist for a reason. Ms. Mitchell bypassed all of them because she thought she knew better. He looked each juror in the eye. The law is the law, and when we break it, there are consequences. That's what this trial is about. Hold Ms. Mitchell accountable. Find her guilty. He sat down. The courtroom was silent. Then Janet stood. She didn't walk to the center of the room immediately. She stood by our table, one hand resting on it, and looked at the jury with an expression of deep sadness. Mr. Green is right about one thing, she said quietly. Laws exist for a reason. They protect us. They create order. They ensure justice. She paused. But what happens when the law fails? What happens when following the law means someone dies? She walked toward the jury now, slowly. Sarah Mitchell opened her door to a dying woman. Not a case file, not a legal problem. A human being who was bleeding out on her doorstep. And in that moment, Sarah had a choice. Follow protocol or save a life. Janet stopped, letting the words sink in. The prosecution wants you to believe she should have called 911. Fine. Let's think about what would have happened if she had. Paramedics arrive. They see Amara has no ID. They call police. Police see she's undocumented. They call ICE. Amara is detained, deported, sent back to Honduras, where the gangs that killed her father and brother are waiting for her. She would be dead within a week. She turned back to the jury. So yes, Sarah could have followed the law, and Amara would be dead. Is that justice? The jury was rapt. Mr. Green says Sarah thought she was above the law. I say she thought human life was above paperwork. And I think most of you would agree. She gestured toward me. Sarah Mitchell spent 15 years saving lives. She didn't ask those lives if they had insurance, or citizenship, or the right paperwork. She just saved them, because that's what nurses do. That's what humans do. She looked back at the jury. This trial isn't about whether Sarah broke the law. She did. She admits it. This trial is about whether breaking a law to save a life is a crime, or an act of courage, whether compassion deserves punishment, or respect. Janet's voice grew stronger. Amara is alive because of Sarah. She's alive, she's healing, and she has a chance at a future. That's not a crime. That's a miracle. She returned to our table. The law should protect people. And that night, Sarah Mitchell did what the law failed to do. Find her not guilty. The 48 hours that felt like 48 years. I stayed in my apartment, unable to eat, unable to sleep, just pacing and waiting for my phone to ring. Janet called me 3 times to tell me not to panic, that long deliberations could mean they were really considering the case, not just rubber stamping a guilty verdict. But I knew the statistics. The prosecution had the law on their side. All the jury had to do was decide if I'd broken it, and I had. I'd admitted as much on the stand. David Ochoa called me on the second day. Amara's asylum hearing is next week. If you're acquitted, it could help her case. Show that she was genuinely in danger, that your decision to help her was justified. And if I'm convicted, he was quiet for a moment, then it gets harder. But we'll keep fighting. I appreciated the optimism, but I wasn't feeling optimistic. On the morning of the 3rd day, my phone rang. It was Janet. They have a verdict, and the courtroom was packed. News cameras lined the back wall. Somehow my case had become a referendum on immigration, healthcare, civil disobedience. I'd become a symbol for something bigger than myself, and I hated it. I just wanted to have helped someone without my entire life falling apart. I sat at the defense table, hands folded, trying to look calm. Inside, I was screaming. The jury filed in. I tried to read their faces. Were they sympathetic, angry, impassive? I couldn't tell. They didn't look at me, which Janet said was a bad sign. The judge entered. We all stood. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, have you reached a verdict? The forewoman, a middle-aged black woman who'd taken notes throughout the trial, stood. We have, Your Honor. On the charge of failure to report a medical emergency, how do you find the defendant? My heart stopped. Not guilty. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel. I couldn't breathe. On the charge of harboring an undocumented immigrant, How do you find the defendant? Please, please. Not guilty. I collapsed into my chair. Janet grabbed my hand, squeezing tight. I heard someone crying behind me. Probably one of the nurses from the hospital who'd come to support me. On the charge of obstruction of justice, how do you find the defendant? Not guilty. It was over. The judge banged his gavel again, trying to restore order. The defendant is acquitted on all charges. Ms. Mitchell, you're free to go. I couldn't move. I just sat there, staring at the jury box, tears streaming down my face. The forewoman caught my eye and nodded. Just a small nod, but it meant everything. They understood. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed me. Cameras flashed. Microphones were shoved in my face. Ms. Mitchell, how do you feel? What do you want to say to people who think you should have been convicted? Will you return to nursing? Janet pushed through the crowd, pulling me toward a waiting car. No comment. Ms. Mitchell has no comment at this time. We drove back to her office in silence. When we got there, she poured us both a drink. Whiskey, neat. And we sat in her cramped office, processing. You did it, she said finally. You actually did it. We did it, I corrected. You and David and Amara. I just showed up. You did more than show up. You gave that jury something to believe in. I sipped the whiskey, feeling it burn. What happens to Amara now? Her hearing is in 6 days. David thinks the acquittal will help, but it's still not guaranteed. Immigration courts are unpredictable. Can I see her? I'll arrange it. I nodded, exhaustion finally catching up to me. Janet, thank you for everything. She smiled. Thank you for reminding me why I became a lawyer. But I went home that night and slept for 14 hours straight. When I woke up, my phone was full of messages. Friends, former colleagues, strangers from across the country. Most were supportive. Some were hateful. I deleted them all. I didn't do this for recognition. I didn't do it to make a statement. I did it because a woman was dying, and I could help. That's all. David Ochoa had worked tirelessly to prepare her case, compiling evidence of the gang violence in Honduras, witness statements from people who knew her family, documentation of Miguel's abuse. The acquittal had helped. It proved Amara's story was credible, that she'd genuinely been in danger. But immigration court is different from criminal court. The judge had broad discretion, and the current political climate wasn't exactly friendly to asylum seekers. I sat in the back of the courtroom, watching Amara take her seat. She looked terrified but determined. She'd been released from detention pending the hearing, and she wore a simple dress that David's wife had lent her. She looked young and small, and I wanted to wrap her in my arms and tell her everything would be okay, but I couldn't promise that. The immigration judge, a stern-faced man named Judge Lawrence Pemberton, reviewed the case file with a skeptical expression. He'd denied 70% of the asylum cases that had come before him in the past year. I'd looked up the statistics. Ms. Hernandez, he began, you entered the United States illegally in 2022. You had multiple opportunities to present yourself at a port of entry and request asylum. You chose not to. Why? Amara's voice was steady. I was 19, Your Honor. I was scared. I didn't know the proper process. I just knew I had to leave Honduras, or I would be killed. Ignorance of the law is not an excuse. I'm not making an excuse, Your Honor. I'm explaining what happened. I've learned since then. I know now what I should have done, but I can't go back and change it. Judge Pemberton looked unmoved. You also failed to apply for asylum within 1 year of your arrival, as required by law. That's another violation. David stood. Your Honor, Ms. Hernandez was in fear for her life. She was working to survive, hiding from an abusive partner, and didn't have access to legal resources. These are documented exceptions to the 1-year deadline. Possibly, but the burden of proof is on Ms. Hernandez to demonstrate that her fear of persecution is well-founded. David presented the evidence. Police reports from Honduras, death certificates for Amara's father and brother, testimony from neighbors who'd witnessed the gang threats, statements from experts on gang violence in Central America. It was overwhelming, horrifying, undeniable, and Judge Pemberton seemed unmoved by all of it. Ms. Hernandez, many people in Honduras face violence. That doesn't automatically qualify you for asylum. You must prove that you were targeted specifically because of your membership in a particular social group. My family was targeted because my father refused to let the gangs recruit my brother. They killed him for that. Then they killed my brother when he tried to protect me. Then they came for me. And you're claiming you can't relocate within Honduras? Your Honor, these gangs are everywhere. They have networks across the country. If I go back, they will find me. Judge Pemberton folded his hands. I'm not convinced you've met the burden of proof. However, given the recent criminal case and the publicity surrounding it, I'll take the matter under advisement and issue a written decision within 30 days. 30 more days of waiting. 30 more days of uncertainty. Amara looked back at me, her eyes filled with desperation. I tried to smile, to give her hope, but I was terrified. Shutter. After the hearing, we went to a small cafe near the courthouse. David bought us coffee, and we sat in a corner booth, silent and exhausted. What do you think? I asked finally. David sighed. Hard to say. Pemberton's a tough judge, but he agreed to consider the case more thoroughly. That's something. But not enough. Maybe not. But we've done everything we can. Amara stared into her coffee cup. If he sends me back, I will die. We're not going to let that happen, I said, though I had no idea how to keep that promise. She looked at me with those same eyes I'd seen that October night. Terrified, desperate, but also grateful. Sarah, whatever happens, thank you. You gave me more time, more life. That is more than anyone else ever gave me. I reached across the table and held her hand. We're going to fight this. All the way. The 30 days crawled by. I returned to work. The hospital reinstated me after the acquittal, though I could feel the tension from some of the administrators. I'd become controversial. Some staff treated me like a hero. Others avoided me like I had a disease. I didn't care. I just wanted to work, to save lives, to do what I'd always done. But everything felt different now. Every patient I treated, I wondered, would I make the same choice again? Would I risk everything to help someone the system had failed? The answer was always yes. On day 29, David called me. The decision came early. My stomach dropped. And, can you come to my office? I want to tell you and Amara together. Amara was already there when I arrived, sitting in David's office, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. I sat beside her and took her hand. David looked at both of us, and I couldn't read his expression. Judge Pemberton granted asylum. The words didn't register at first. Then Amara gasped, her free hand flying to her mouth. What? He granted it. Full asylum. You can stay in the United States. You can apply for a work permit. You're safe. Amara burst into tears. I pulled her into my arms, and we just held each other and cried. How? I managed to ask. Why did he change his mind? David smiled. His written decision cited the criminal trial. He said the jury's verdict demonstrated that your fear was credible, that you were genuinely in danger, and that the system had failed to protect you. He also noted that Sarah's willingness to risk her career to save you indicated the severity of the threat you faced. I couldn't speak. I just held Amara tighter. She was safe. She was going to be okay. We'd won. 6 months later, I stood in a community center in downtown Harrisburg, looking out at a room full of faces. Nurses, doctors, social workers, immigration attorneys, activists, and people like Amara, survivors who'd been failed by the system but refused to give up. I'd been asked to speak at a forum on healthcare access for undocumented immigrants. 6 months ago, I would have said no. I wasn't a public speaker. I wasn't an activist. I was just a nurse. But I'd learned something through this ordeal. Silence is complicity. If I had a platform, a voice, I had to use it. My name is Sarah Mitchell, I began, my voice echoing through the room. And 6 months ago, I was put on trial for saving a woman's life. I told them the story. All of it. The knock on my door, the blood, the choice, the trial, the verdict, the asylum hearing. I didn't hold back. I'm not telling you this story because I want to be celebrated, I said. I'm telling you because what happened to Amara happens every day. People in crisis, people fleeing violence, people who need help, and a system that punishes them for seeking it. I looked out at the crowd. We have laws that are supposed to protect people, but when those laws fail, when they become tools of harm instead of help, we have a moral obligation to act, not with violence, not with cruelty, but with compassion. I paused. I broke the law that night. I admit it. I'd do it again. Because no law should ever force you to choose between legality and humanity. And if it does, then the law is wrong. Not you. The room was silent. So here's what I want you to take away from this. If you see someone in need, help them. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for the system to catch up. Just help. And if there are consequences, we'll face them together. Because that's what community means. That's what compassion means. I stepped back from the microphone. The room erupted in applause. After the talk, Amara found me. She was working now. David had helped her get a work permit, and she'd found a job at a bakery. She looked healthy, happy, alive. "Sarah," she said, hugging me tight. "Thank you for everything, for my life." "You don't have to thank me," I said. "Just live it. Live it fully." She smiled, tears in her eyes. "I will. I promise." We stood there for a moment, two women whose lives had collided in the most unexpected way, bound together by a single act of compassion. "What will you do now?" she asked. I thought about it. Keep working. Keep helping people. Keep fighting for a system that values life over paperwork. That sounds like a good plan. What about you? She looked out at the crowd, at the people gathered to talk about change, about justice, about compassion. "I want to help people like me, people who are scared and don't know where to go. I want to be the person who opens the door." I smiled. "You'll be amazing at it." I drove home that night thinking about everything that had happened. The knock on the door, the trial, the verdict, the asylum hearing, the journey from terrified nurse to reluctant activist. I thought about the jury forewoman who'd nodded at me, the nurses who'd supported me, Janet and David who'd fought for me, and Amara, who'd trusted me with her life. I thought about all the people who'd told me I was wrong, that I'd broken the law, that I deserved punishment, and I thought about how, in the end, none of that mattered, because Amara was alive, and that was worth everything. This story took place in Pennsylvania, but moments like this happen everywhere, in small towns, big cities, places where people have to choose between doing what's legal and doing what's right. If this story touched your heart, drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Let's build a community of compassion together. They say every story teaches something. Mine taught me this. Compassion isn't convenient. It doesn't arrive at a good time. It doesn't wait for you to be ready, to have a plan, to know the right answers. It shows up bleeding on your doorstep at midnight, asking you to make an impossible choice. And in that moment, you learn who you really are. Not who you think you are, not who you want to be, but who you actually are when everything is on the line. I learned that I couldn't live with myself if I'd turned Amara away. I couldn't have slept at night knowing she'd died because I was afraid of the consequences. That fear of losing my job, my freedom, my reputation, it was real. It was valid, but it wasn't stronger than my need to help. And here's what I want you to understand. That doesn't make me special. I'm not a hero. I'm not extraordinary. I'm just someone who made a choice in a moment when a choice was required, and every single one of you has that same capacity. Every day, we encounter moments where we can choose compassion or convenience. Most of them aren't as dramatic as mine. Most of them don't involve life and death, but they matter. The homeless person asking for help, the coworker who's struggling, the stranger who needs directions, the person being harassed who needs someone to speak up. These are our moments, and the lesson I learned, the one I want to share with you, is this. The systems we trust to protect people don't always work. And when they fail, we have to be the safety net. Not because it's easy, not because we'll be rewarded, but because it's right. The law told me to call 911. The law told me to report Amara and let the system handle it. But the law didn't see her as a person. It saw her as a case file, a problem to be processed and removed. I saw her as a human being, and that's the difference. Here's what I want you to remember. 1. Laws are tools, not truths. They're created by people, and people are imperfect. When a law protects the powerful and punishes the vulnerable, it's not a just law. It's a barrier to justice, and we have a moral duty to challenge it. 2. Compassion requires courage. It's easy to care when it costs you nothing. It's easy to be kind when everyone's watching and approval is guaranteed. Real compassion, the kind that matters, demands sacrifice. It demands that you risk something to help someone else. 3. You are enough. You don't need special training to be compassionate. You don't need permission to help. You just need to see someone in need and decide that their humanity matters more than your comfort. 4. We are the system. We wait for governments, institutions, organizations to solve problems. But those systems are made of people like us. And if we're not willing to act, those systems will never change. Amara is alive today because I didn't wait for permission to help her, because I trusted my heart over the rulebook, because I believed that saving a life was more important than protecting myself. And yes, it cost me. It cost me months of fear, a criminal trial, my reputation, nearly my career. But it gave me something too. It gave me clarity. It gave me purpose. It gave me the knowledge that when the moment came, I did the right thing. And that's worth everything. It's sinking. So here's my challenge to you. The next time you see someone in need, really see them, not pass them. Don't walk away. Don't tell yourself it's not your problem, that someone else will handle it, that you don't have time. Stop. Help. Be the person who opens the door. Because the world doesn't change through grand gestures and perfect systems. It changes through small acts of courage. Through ordinary people who decide that compassion matters more than convenience. Through people like you. They told me I broke the law by saving a life. And maybe I did. But I'd rather break 1,000 laws than break my own heart by walking away from someone who needed me. That's the lesson. That's the story. And I hope, when your moment comes, you'll choose compassion too. From all of us at Touching Stories, thank you for being part of this community. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, compassion is a choice. Make it every day.